Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. I like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. Today, we're welcoming Andy Whitcomb, whose journey from furniture designer to cabin creator offers fresh insights into crafting immersive experiences that reconnect guests with nature. From his early days learning Airbnb hosting in a 6-bedroom Seattle house to creating a row of 3 stunning riverside cabins, Andy shares how his background in design and entrepreneurship has shaped his approach to hospitality. We'll explore his philosophy that cabin culture is about leaving the fake, superficial world and entering a more real world, and how that belief guides every decision, from foregoing TVs in favor of record players to creating Instagram-worthy moments that don't feel contrived. Whether you're an established host looking to elevate your property from good to great, someone curious about the evolution of Airbnb from its early days to post-pandemic reality, or simply interested in the intersection of design, nature, and hospitality, this conversation offers both practical wisdom and creative inspiration. We'll dive into everything from the importance of creating unique experiences to navigating county permit challenges, and why sometimes the best feature of your property is the one thing you can't create yourself. Let's do it. I actually want to start with you with something you said in your pre-interview form. This is how you described cabin culture, which I always think is just a really fascinating entrance to this conversation, because it all starts
Yeah.
different places for us and it all means different things to us. So you said, to me, cabin culture is an escape into nature and into the analog. It's about being present. It's about escaping to a place where time slows down, distractions are minimized, and your senses are freed up to take in the scent of cedar, the sound of a rushing creek, and the crackle of a warm fire. And perhaps my favorite part of this, you said it's about leaving the fake, superficial world and entering a more real world. When did you first experience this?
Well, um, I kind of I was kind of raised into that world originally because I grew up on a summer camp in the middle of the woods, 1,000 acres with a river and a lake, and I just spent all my time outside in nature, building tree houses and fishing and running around, riding my bike, and
Yeah.
so that was the world that I knew. And then as I got older and got thrown into uh, what we know as the real world, urban life, I sort of lost a lot of that, but I always had a
Mhm.
longing for it.
Mhm.
And it was always sort of in the back of my head. And I would always go back to it for hiking and, mountain climbing, backpacking, biking, all of that stuff. And
Mhm.
my business partner, Forrest, he also had a passion for that. So we just always had this like longing for that, but we were
Mhm.
living right in the city in Seattle,
Mhm.
very urban life. And whenever we could escape into the mountains, it just was like, oh my gosh, I've been needing this. I've
Yes.
been needing it so bad. And you
Yes.
don't realize how bad you need it until you get out there.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is sort of really the reason why we decided, man, we need to get a cabin and we need to create an experience that other people can have this reset that we feel that we always need.
Yeah.
So,
It feels interesting to me because so many of us in this world and so many people I've talked to have experiences from our childhood that introduced us to this feeling very early. But I
mhm,
actually don't even I think it's more inherent than that. Have you heard of the
yeah,
concept of grounding?
yeah, mhm,
That just tells me, okay, if everybody, regardless of who they are, can take their shoes off and connect with the ground and have like a clear experience and an impact of that. This isn't
yeah,
actually about like, how old were you when you first started going camping, right? It
yeah.
almost feels like it was born into us. It's just some of us were allowed to experience it earlier and more often than others.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I call it the real world, because this
Yeah.
is how
Yeah.
humanity is designed to be. Like we're supposed to be in nature and entwined with it, and we've just lost that in modern culture. And it's I think everybody gets that on some level. It's just, it becomes, we get so caught up in digital and in the city and in all the hustle and bustle that we forget until we get out and we get
Right.
this reset and we're like, whoa, that's what I needed
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah. Which is what's so fascinating, I think, in this modern world of cabin culture that is, I would say, 50% physical. You're actually there in the cabin having the experience. And then
Hmm.
50% is actually longing. Or I'm on Instagram scrolling and I stop because I see a cabin that I'd like to go to. Or
Hmm.
I'm guilty of this. I'm sitting in my living room reading a book and I have a YouTube channel that's taking me somewhere else and just plays music in the background, right?
Yeah.
It's almost
Yeah.
like we're trying to recreate these experiences in the midst of our busy everyday lives until we can return to that. Because it's only
Yeah.
so often we can actually go to the cabin and physically be there without giving up
Yeah.
our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I even I live kind of in the woods right now, and I still don't get out. I look out the window, I see some trees, and I think, oh, I should go out on a little hike.
Yeah.
But I'm just that's all I get sometimes. It's just a
Yeah.
little glance because life just grabs you and takes you where you're going.
That's right. So quickly, so
Yeah.
quickly.
Hmm.
That's why I think it's kind of beautiful, and I'm also torn about this, the growth of people creating unique experiences that are in the woods. It's giving
Hmm.
more people the opportunity and more places that pull them out into nature.
Yeah.
And then also it's a highly digitized experience, and so part of it just feels less authentic, which is what I really liked about your description. It's
Yeah.
about leaving the fake superficial world and entering a more real world, which is totally what I feel like when I'm, like, backpacking. But I'm
Hmm.
losing that a little bit in cabin culture because we're all not all of us, but many of us are also marketing our cabins, right? Trying to
Yeah.
make it appealing on Instagram, and so there is this element of losing that authenticity in the world of marketing because capitalism. So I'm a little torn by the growth of this in recent years.
Yeah, yeah, we are always sort of straddling that line with I mean, we have a pretty good following on social media, and that's really a big driver for our bookings, which is
Right.
great, but I I don't wanna go on there to do the
Oh,
stuff.
I
And
know.
then also in the cabin experience, we've really pushed back on, like, we don't have a TV.
Yeah.
We don't have, like, we have a stereo and we have a record player, again,
Yep.
trying to get more to that analog as much as we can,
Yeah.
and we don't have any iPad screens in there. Like, I know
Yep.
that it would probably improve the guest experience if I had, like, an iPad or something like that that they could, but we're always trying to balance that and say, okay, what's gonna help the guest experience, but not take them back into that digital world that we're trying to escape from.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so sad for so many of us as own because we do the same thing. We don't have a TV. We only have a stereo
Hmm.
and we have tons of books that have been curated through recommendations, right? Because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe this will pull people away from their devices. So I like to think we're creating a good guest experience. But when I'm there, what do I spend a lot of my time doing? Capturing content because I'm only
Hmm.
there once a month, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, it's like I love it and hate it. It fills our calendar and it allows us to share this experience with other people. And I hate
Yeah.
it because my own cabin isn't a place where I can get off a device because I have to share it with other people constantly. So there's that tension that doesn't go away.
Yeah, yeah. I thankfully am not good at photography or anything, so we have some buddies that are really good at that. So they come and take photos and video,
There you go.
uh, but when I get up to cabins, I'm usually the one that's like looking at all the things that need to be fixed
Yep.
and I'm the handyman, so I'm always fixing everything. And it is hard to just be present and just enjoy the sound of the
Yeah.
river and jump in the hot tub. I don't think I've ever been in a hot tub.
Really? Oh, that's the one
Yeah.
thing that I I definitely use a lot.
Yeah, yeah, my wife likes it, but I am not as much into hot tub, although I do think we're gonna probably be adding some saunas to our cabins, and that I probably would be a little more into.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like there's a
So,
divide because we don't have any saunas because 'cause I'm not a sauna person, but we've
mhm,
thought about it because a lot of other people are more sauna than hot tub. But I wanna go back to what you were saying because I think this is really interesting. You have one of the things that makes your cabins really different, and I think your approach stand out is because you are about creating immersive experiences. So what you were
Yeah.
just describing of like all of those things aren't just choices of like, oh, we want to save money on not having a TV. It's a really intentional
Hmm.
choice that
Yeah.
curates the experience for them. So when you stepped back and first started thinking about your cabins, you had previously been a furniture designer and you
Hmm.
co-founded a business, which was a
Hmm.
store in Seattle.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so you had thought about these things in the past, what those experiences are like. How did you
Yeah.
approach this one differently, or what did you pull from those experiences for this one?
Well, I think the original like thought of buying a cabin and renting it out was, I mean, that was years back when we were staying at a cabin, group of friends, Forrest and a few others. Um, and we were in this really cool space. You look out, you see these mountains, but it was one of those, especially back then, it was pretty normal to have a pretty cool cabin full of grandma's old, you know, furniture and everything else. And it was not any thought put into the decor or the experience beyond, hey, you're out in the middle of nature. So we thought, man, we could really do this on a really high level. And I don't even know if Airbnb was out. This was a long time ago. I don't even know if Airbnb was a thing yet, but we had this idea. We could rent this out to people, but we had no money. And at that time, and we didn't know how to do it. I knew nothing about real estate or anything. But as time went on, it stuck in the back of our head and it was a goal of ours. So eventually we started, let's see, yeah, we started Glasswing. And we, at the same time we started Glasswing, Forest and I also started a second business, which was a furniture company called Brackish. And that was a kind of a low run, like small run and custom furniture company. And then Glasswing is a clothing and plant store.
Mhm.
And we ended up merging them together. But between both of those, we were very much, it was about creating something beautiful, creating something that was eventually with the retail store, it was an immersive experience.
Yeah.
Um, and with the furniture, you're helping to create an experience in other people's homes.
Yeah.
So I think it just was something that just naturally, it's just something we naturally wanted to do. It was just
Yeah.
ingrained in us as designers and as people that wanted to share what we created with the world.
I'm going to pause you there. I want to
Great.
get to the cabin, but I think there's
Yeah.
something here that really speaks to the power of brand. And I'm curious how much I think designers have something that leads them to developing stronger brands because you have such an
Mm,
appreciation for aesthetic. But the fact that you could merge two companies together seamlessly, and then the way that you described it in your pre-interview was that the store actually has a lot of synergy with your cabin. So many of the
yeah.
store customers like to stay at your cabins because it's an extension of the brand. You said
Yeah.
it's like living in the store for a weekend. And I thought to
Hmm.
myself, the first thing I thought when I read that was like, that is the power of brand. That you
Yeah.
could take a store and then seamlessly build a cabin that people who love the store then want to go to the cabin because it's the same feeling. And
Yeah.
that I think for a lot of folks, they don't understand like why
Hmm.
branding is important. It's not about a logo or throwing your logo on everything in the house, right? It's about that
Yeah.
feeling. Do you think
Yeah.
the designers are better at that because you're thinking about it all the time with like the furniture you're designing or the aesthetic of the store? Or did you learn
Uh,
about this intentionally?
it was not intentional. Well, I shouldn't say it wasn't intentional. We knew it was happening, but it was just like so natural for us.
Huh.
We didn't know how to do it any different because everything we do, it has a certain aesthetic and a certain style. And I couldn't even pinpoint what that was. It just, that's what we do. That's how we
Yeah.
create things. And that's the materiality that we use. And that's the design aesthetic that just appeals to us.
Yeah.
So when we created the store, I designed all the furniture and fixtures in the store. And so that already had an inherent aesthetic. And then
Okay.
when we did the cabin, not only did that aesthetic carry through, but a lot of the products that we had in the stores, we just naturally put them in our cabin because we already like them and we can get them at wholesale.
Yeah.
So that it was very obvious to us, and at the same time, we knew that it was very powerful from from a symbiotic branding and marketing relationship.
Yeah.
And just the customers, they would always come into our store and say, "Oh my goodness, I just want to live here." And so then I'm thinking, well, you know what? You can live in something like that for a couple of nights or a
Right.
week once we get these cabins going, which we end up doing.
And then you get the cabins going and they live there for a weekend or a week and they're like, "Well, now I need this furniture in my house." So it is
Yeah,
very symbiotic both directions.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or just the yeah, like we have real plants in our cabins, which a lot of people don't do. I personally just couldn't stomach doing it another way. Like having
Yeah.
fake plants just
Yeah.
makes me cringe. But that's because we have a plant store. We actually at one point
Nice.
had a second store that was just dedicated to plants,
Wow.
and that one got steamrolled by COVID. But
Yeah.
uh, we have a very heavy plant presence at Glasswing, and we actually have a whole division where all we do is installations of plants in commercial environments. And
You do a lot. Were you
yeah,
always this entrepreneurial? Because it feels like everything we talk about, you're like, "Well, I've also started a business about," which is not unusual, I feel like.
yeah.
But have you always been like this?
For the most part, there was a period in time when I was working for other people, and I always was just like, I don't like this. And then once my mindset shifted to where I realized that I could start my own business, there was no turning back. At
Yeah.
this point, I tell people I'm unemployable. I,
Yeah.
I could not work for, especially a big corporation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm always starting stuff and doesn't always work out. And even the furniture, I stopped doing custom furniture partly because it was a grind. It was always a grind, and I could never get the pricing quite figured out.
So hard.
Uh, yeah, but with the cabins, I still could scratch that itch by creating furniture and creating something beautiful, and then at the same time, I didn't have to send it off and never see it again. I got to always be around it,
Right. Right.
and so that really, to me, I said, I'm just going to focus on that. And I could still do the furniture as a part of that, but it's more fulfilling. And the cabins are just a little bit more lucrative, really, in the long
Yeah.
run for the
Yeah.
amount of energy that you put in.
Right. I think about that all that because I've run several businesses. Whenever I like go to an art market and I see someone who's crocheting clothing, I'm like, I know how long it takes to crochet a sweater. I
Hmm.
can't imagine how you can make that money back because people aren't willing to pay like $350 for a sweater. But if you're putting
Hmm.
that much care and love into it, that's what it would cost you to do it. So furniture
Yeah.
feels like a similar challenge when it comes to price point. So this led you to the cabins, which I interrupted you because I was curious about
Sorry.
brand. I just think that brand is so many people think it's like, I need a designer to make me a logo, pick me some colors, whatever. And it's just,
Hmm.
to me, it's like you're starting at the wrong place. You have to know first, what do I want people to feel when they're in that place or interacting with that brand, and then go from there. And the way you described it just tells me like that's exactly what you all did. The fact that they all can work together seamlessly. So you had this store and the furniture company. And then you said you were looking for the first cabin. So I'm assuming it started
Hmm.
with one. I know it's more than one now. Take
Yeah.
us there,
Yeah.
how that transition happened.
Well, it's so funny because we were looking originally like 2010, 2011, when all the bargains were out there, but we just had no money and we had no idea anything about how to buy real estate at that time.
Yeah.
Now I could probably have figured it out because I
Yeah.
know a lot more about creative finance and things like that. But
Well, there's a lot more
uh,
resources now too. People weren't
yeah,
teaching in the same way then that they are now.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I turned down cabins that were like $40,000 in like really great areas, and uh, so but we just weren't there yet.
Yeah.
So we had to. I started educating myself on the real estate side, reading books and going to events and things like that, meetups, and learning about actually how do you buy real estate. And
Mhm.
then at the same time, I reached out to at the same time I realized, hey, this Airbnb thing is starting to be a thing. This is about 2015. I said, this is actually a thing. I probably should learn how to do this. I had no idea how to
Yeah.
do Airbnb. So I reached out. Well, at first I thought, well, I'll just rent out my apartment. And I found out quickly that that wasn't going to work.
Why
So
didn't that
then,
work?
well, they didn't want us to.
Okay.
We would have got
Okay.
in trouble.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, I got to find somebody who will let me, like, where I just approach them and say, can I didn't even know anything about arbitrage or anything at that
Right.
time. So I just so happened to know a couple guys that, oh, actually turns out they owned a lot of real estate, and I just kind of was lucky enough to already know them. And I said, hey guys, I want to do Airbnb. Do you have an apartment that I can rent and just re-rent it as a short-term rental? And they said, oh yeah, we got plenty. And then they said,
You knew the right people.
yeah, it worked. It was good. And he goes, we actually just bought a house in the middle of Capitol Hill in Seattle, which is like the really trendy part of
Yep.
Seattle. They own the other 3 houses on the block, and they're eventually going to build a hotel there. And he said, that house is actually already been run as a short-term rental. So it's already furnished, and the lady we're buying it from, she can show you the ropes on how to do it. She helped us set up. So we end up leasing that from him. And right the day we signed the lease is the day he closed. He hands us the keys. She comes in and like shows us how to set up our account, just gives us her photos and
Oh my
gives us
God.
her
Amazing.
descriptions. We got about a year's leg up with that. And the other thing that was great about that house is it was a 6-bedroom house, and they were renting each bedroom individually
Oh,
for like 100.
fascinating.
Yeah, it was like $150 per bedroom. And so we were basically running this little
Hotel.
hotel. Yeah. And all the furniture was like IKEA. And so over time we started swapping out for stuff that we just had because we were still running our furniture company. So we just swapped it out and elevated it, brought in plants, and raised all the prices. And we were doing between like $15,000 to $27,000 a month with that property. And like summertime, it was like 25,
Yeah.
27,000. And so we just learned a lot. And then we sort of just stacked the money up with the idea that eventually we're going to go buy a cabin. And during that time, I ended up finding a cabin on Craigslist. And the listing was, it was so cool. The photos were okay. They weren't great. And the listing said that she wants to sell it to somebody who's going to run it as an Airbnb because she has a cleaner that lives next door and she doesn't want her to lose her job. So
Oh,
I was like, oh, so you're telling me it's turnkey,
right. You
basically.
already have a cleaner
I already have a cleaner.
who's
And
next door. This is like best case scenario.
yeah, so we got in, it was seller financing. I put like 20% down, and we got this cabin, and we just grabbed a bunch of our furniture, threw it in there, and started getting it renting as soon as we could. And then later we would go in and do some renovations and
Yeah.
things that to bring it up to our standards. But yeah, that was our first one. And when we bought that, it came with a second lot next door that had this little RV trailer on it. It was not my style. I couldn't put my name on that listing. So
Yeah.
we just sold that with the idea of bringing in our own little tiny house, which we eventually did.
Yeah.
And while we were doing that project, the neighbor next door, this was actually a funny story because I was standing there going, how amazing would it be if we had 3 cabins in a row on one river? And so I'm standing on the deck of our first cabin. I'm looking over and I see our house, the vacant lot that we're putting a tiny house on, and then I see another cabin down there. I said, we got to get that cabin. So I already knew the guy because he's our neighbor. I texted him, and then apparently he never got the text because he had just got a new phone number. But he walks out an hour later and walks up to me and says, I'm thinking about selling my house. Would you
Oh
guys
my
be
God.
interested? And I was
You
like, oh, you got
manifested
my,
that.
yeah, seriously. I said, you got my text? He goes, no, I didn't. I just got a new phone. But so I'm like, okay, this is meant to be.
Yeah.
So we bought that house, did a bunch of renovation on it, and then we had our 3 cabins.
Okay, this is like almost a bad story for all of our listeners to be hearing because it's like it will never be this easy for anybody.
Well, and you know what? It'd be worse if I included the prices in it. So
Yeah, exactly. Don't tell us. We don't want to know.
yeah,
But to find it on Craigslist already with a cleaner, probably the number
yeah.
2 question I get asked by people is like, "How do you find a good cleaner?" Because you can't do it without that. And then a lot where you can build your own, and then a 3rd cabin right there. Oh my gosh, that's like
Well, and the neighbor, who's the cleaner, her partner was a handyman, and he actually built the cabin years back.
so he knew
So
everything about it.
he knew everything about it.
Yeah, that's like the dream.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So he was able. I mean, he's getting a little bit older now, so he does still a little bit of stuff for us. But we have another handyman that works with us. But it was a lifesaver having them and
yeah,
just right next door. And um, so she was retired. She's retired, so she's always available.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
that's the ideal. And it's also hard because now you're sort of really leaning on one person.
Yeah,
And if something happens, which something always does,
right, right.
then you have to eventually. If we eventually now we have like 5 different cleaners, um, and a couple of handymen.
Yeah, just in case. This is such a, I think, perfect example of what Airbnb was like back in the day. Not the
Yeah.
cabins, but that first part of your story. Because, like, I
Hmm.
remember that so clearly. But folks, and you mentioned this earlier in your pre-interview about the COVID boom, and I
Oh
saw that
yeah.
happen. And I started hosting in my own house in a guest room back in 2013 or 2014, early days of Airbnb. But that's what
Hmm.
it was like, right? You heard about this Airbnb thing, and the right people, the people who'd like used couch surfing or were like instinctively entrepreneurial, were like,
Hmm.
oh, there's some opportunity here. How do I play with it? And I feel like so many of those first Airbnbs were creative solutions. Now it's just,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to build a cabin or I'm going to buy one and turn it
Hmm.
into an air. But back then it wasn't quite like that. It was people
Yeah.
figuring it out.
And the bar was so low. So if you were
So
doing anything like somewhat interesting, it was so easy to make money and get people to stay at your place.
yeah.
And uh,
Even
sort
if
of
you
miss
weren't,
those
I
days.
mean, I had a futon bed and I was making money. I stayed
Yeah.
someplace where he threw a party that night while we were staying in his guest room. We were trying to sleep, and I'm like, "Is there a party happening out there?" But that's like what Airbnb in the early days was like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an amenity. You show up and there's a party.
That's
That's part
right.
of the amenities.
That's right.
Uh,
But people
yeah. No.
complain now, and I'm like, "You don't know what it," like, guests who travel now, right,
Hmm.
complain about, "I saw an ant in it." I'm like, "You don't know what Airbnb was like
Oh
back
yeah.
in the day."
Yeah. Yeah. The Wild West. But
The
I actually love that it's changed because I think for people that are really trying to create, like I always say, I'm trying to create a really compelling and amazing and unforgettable experience.
Yeah.
Like all it's doing is just making us be better. I
Yeah.
love, you mentioned Devin earlier, and I love being in circles with people like that because they're always upping the ante on what they're creating, and it makes me say, "Oh, you know what? I got to up the ante
That's
too."
right.
And I get to up the ante because I have all these ideas rolling around in my head, and I'm kind of forced to make them happen.
Yeah. You said in your pre-interview, I'm sorry that I'm quoting you so much. It's just not all of them are like beautiful. And this one said, I am also an artist who is always on the edge of abandoning everything and just making paintings and sculpture. And anyone with a creative brain, I think could so deeply relate to that sentiment of like, yes, I've turned my creativity into a day job, which I've
Mhm.
done. And then I'm like, wait, but now it's not a creative outlet anymore. So I'm always
Mhm.
on the edge of like, how do I throw it all away? And it does feel like Airbnb as a side job for a lot of people is the place where you can play a little bit in a lower,
Yeah.
it's not always lower stakes if you're building, but if you're renovating or
Mhm.
decorating, it's a place to kind of play a little bit. And that's what I
Yeah.
hear you saying.
Yeah. Yeah, because what I was thinking about when I wrote that is, I like to do, you know, I haven't been doing as much furniture, and part of me is always thinking, "Well, what if I just had a shop and all I did was just build furniture?" Or
Yeah.
now I'm doing these paintings and certain technique of painting. I'm thinking, "Oh, I could just dive into that." And my brain, as a creative person, is like, "I could just make this into something really great if I just really focused
Yeah.
on it." And but the nice thing with creating a space like a short-term rental in a cabin is I get to do all of that. I get to do a little bit of
Mhm.
furniture. I get to do a little bit of art. I get to even dabble in architecture if I want to do some
Right,
renovations. And
right.
uh, so it does scratch those itches a little bit. And I think that's what keeps me from just selling everything and moving to Portugal and creating art,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Although I did read something, this was like 10 years ago now, because I have tended to everything that I do creatively. I mean, even I took a pottery class once and I started making earrings. And before you know it, I'm selling earrings. And so it's like that instinct, it sounds you might have. You have the creativity and the
Hmm.
entrepreneurial spirit. Anytime you do something creative and you're like, this is pretty good, you're like, oh, well, I could turn it into this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was reading this thing that was like, we're losing what it felt like to just play with art with
Mm,
no stakes if we turn all of our creative hobbies into something we can sell
yeah.
rather than something that we do purely for the benefit that it has on us as creatives. I don't know how we get back to that, but I see in you what I feel in myself.
Yeah.
And because I do that too.
I think it's a combination of having that entrepreneurial spirit as well as being really creative and having that
Mhm.
artistic spirit. We like to just meld the two as much as we can.
Yeah.
And if I was purely just artistic and not entrepreneurial, then I probably would be a starving artist, and I would just. And
Right.
I've been in phases of that. And before I was married, my wife pulled me out of it and said, "You can't live like that."
Yeah.
But it's amazing. You wake up and you're just like, "What am I going to create today?"
Yeah.
And you try to see who's going to give you a little bit of money for it.
Yeah.
And I think if I wasn't entrepreneurial, that's where I would have landed.
Yeah. Well, and add in that third element of being unemployable. And so now there's pressure to turn your creativity into something you can make money from because we live in a
Exactly.
capitalist country, so we have to pay the bills. But like, okay, if I
Hmm.
can't work for anyone else, then I'm going to take this creative outlet and turn it into a business. But I
Yeah.
suspect, I don't know this for sure, that a lot of the people listening feel that same way. What's interesting, you mentioned Devon, and one thing I notice in a lot of the folks in this space now is once they've done it successfully for themselves, the next step is to probably do it a second or a third time, which you did,
Hmm.
which I did,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
Devon is doing. And also to then say, okay, I've figured some of this out. Let me teach others, which I also know that
Mm.
you do and Devon does
Hmm.
and I do, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's something really beautiful about, I don't know, maybe it's the entrepreneurial spirit and we're like, okay, we can turn it into this second business. But there's also this risk of like you're teaching other people in a somewhat limited market. I don't think it's that limited, but like
Hmm.
you're fine tuning the competition in a way. But what I love
Yeah.
is that nobody seems to feel that way about it. The people in this
Yeah.
space seem to really feel, and so I'd be curious what your perspective, why you decided to go into sharing this with other people and what has that
Hmm.
experience been like?
Well, I mean, I think it's a couple things. For one, I don't really view this as a competitive space, even though yes, technically we're competing against each other. There's only so many people going to book, but I just think if you're doing something really good and beautiful and creative, like you're going to be successful. You're going to rise to the top in this industry, and nobody's going to do it the way you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's different for everybody. And that kind of goes back to the brand that you referenced with our store and our cabins. It's got our fingerprint on it, and nobody else has that. So that's part of it. Um, the other part is just like the the rising tide raises all ships. You know, if there's people doing amazing cabins in my area, it's just going to bring more people wanting to come to that area, and
Yeah.
I just need to raise my bar up, and
Yeah.
then they're going to come to mine as well.
Yeah.
So, and then the other part of it is I just feel like it's a waste if I don't share it with people. I
Yeah.
see people that I can help, and I'm like, well, if you just did this, this, and this, you'd do a lot better on that.
Yeah.
So at this point, and this is also a thing that I debate on how much do I want to dive into it as a business. At this point, I'm mostly just kind of helping out friends and people that I meet that come up to me and say, "Oh, I really want to do this," or either they want to do short-term rentals, or more often they have something and they want to either it's already renting and they want to make it better, or they want to figure out how they can turn it into a long-term
Yeah.
into a short-term.
Yeah.
And so then this is what's great about it, and this is one of the reasons I like doing it. I get to do the fun part. I sit down with them and I just dream. And I say, this is what I would do. I would do this. I would do this.
Yes.
And by the end of it, they've got a list like this long. And this one guy, Zach, he's awesome. His property is around the corner from ours in Granite Falls, and he's got a barn, and he had like a barn dominium, and I went in there and I said, this is a cool space, but it's kind of rough around the edges. And he said, just tell me what you would do if you had it. And so I just went off and I said, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to go a little bit crazy on dreaming here. And so I said, I would do this, I would do this, I would do this. And he went and did it all.
Wow.
So he's done all of that. And so now I'm actually going to design and build a big, huge farmhouse table for the middle. And it's going to be an awesome space. And I'm just sitting there going, I didn't have to call the contractors. I didn't have to do anything.
I didn't have to do any of the work.
I just got to dream. And that's what I love doing. So if I can just consult people, if they're missing that piece that for me is the easiest part, then why wouldn't I help them out?
Yeah.
You know? And someday maybe I'll figure out a way to monetize that. But for now, it's more just like people that
personally
come to me.
Rewarding.
Yeah.
If you're dreaming about a cabin build, or are in the midst of a build, or you just bought a place and are getting ready to host for the very first time, regardless of where you are, sometimes you just need a little help along the way. Shared experiences from someone who's been there, advice from someone who's learned a lot of lessons the hard way. That's me. Or a cheerleader as you finish up. All of these reasons are exactly why I started offering cabin consultations to our Instagram followers and friends who could use some specific one-on-one help. I can't promise to solve all your problems, but I can promise to be transparent about our build costs and process, our organization and project management systems, our favorite and least favorite tools for renting, how we market, and how we found ourselves with almost 80,000 Instagram followers and 100% occupancy in our first year of hosting at Cozy Rock. So if that sounds like it might help you, feel free to visit us at staycozycabin.com or on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and sign up for a time to chat there. My filmmaking mentor said to me once, he said, mediocre is taken. There's a lot less competition at the top. And I think about that all of the time. It's like you can make mediocre films and you can fight that battle every day of trying to convince someone that you're worth it, or you can spend all your energy on making the best films you can possibly make. And suddenly you're having to convince less people. And it feels like that resonates here with what you're doing. You're not worried about competition because you're not in the middle of the pack. You are really putting everything you have into it, rising to the top, and the competition is just thinner up there.
Yeah. And my philosophy too has been, even before the whole COVID and then Airbnb bust, all of that business, I was from a business standpoint, I was thinking, okay, at some point things are going to slow down, and I need to figure out how to position ourselves so that when things slow down, we are not like just out of business.
Right.
And one of those things was just be as good as you can be.
Yeah.
You can always drop your prices a little bit. And if you're the best, even if nobody else is booked, if there's one person coming to that area, they're going to book yours because yours is the best. And it's in their wheelhouse because you've dropped the price.
Yeah.
So, and the other aspect of that in that mindset was, let's try to build up as much of a pent-up demand for our particular property as we can. And so that's why we leaned into social media, and we bring content creators and influencers out to our property. And we started doing that quite a while ago, and it's really helped a lot. Just to kind of, my thought is like, if the general demand drops, but ours has a pent-up demand, then we're going to be the last one to drop.
That's right.
And that's exactly what happened.
So I want to, if you don't mind indulging us for a little bit, and by us, I mean myself and everyone listening, but the COVID boom was a real thing. And for those of us who were hosting long before COVID, we saw both, and I don't know how it impacted you in Washington, short period of real fear, because in our case we were forced to stop hosting for 2 months. That was very scary. And then as soon as it opened back up, like almost immediately, it was like occupancy I'd never seen.
Yeah.
in any of my previous years hosting. But a lot of folks who are listening to this came in during COVID, and you mentioned this in your
Mm-hmm.
pre-interview,
Mm-hmm.
experienced that as their starting point, and now are kind of reeling because it not only has that demand gone down as people travel internationally, but supply has gone up and more and more
Mm-hmm.
people are entering the market. And so, having been through that and the experience that you have, what insight or advice would you give someone who is just now experiencing that to increase their occupancy?
Well, I think it comes back to, well, what happened was the all these people came in when it was hot, right? And
Mm.
everybody said, "Oh wow, I can't make money buying a house and renting it as a long-term rental. I can't really make money buying office buildings, or whatever. But this Airbnb thing is going crazy, so I'm going to jump in." And a lot of people came in from a real estate investor mindset, looking at the return, but they didn't look at what product they were offering. They just said, "I'm just going to buy this thing, throw it out there, make it kind of cool." So you got all this mediocre product, kind of back to your
Yeah.
reference before. And then, so that saturated the market. Meanwhile, the people that really were, well, meanwhile, as more and more product came onto the market, then the guest started to raise their expectations.
Yeah.
And as those guests raised their expectations, if you didn't raise along with it or already had something that met those expectations, you're going to be left in the dust of everybody. So that's, I think, a lot of what happens. So if you came in with one of those mediocre products, which a lot of people did, then my advice to you is you got to figure out a way to make it not mediocre.
Yeah.
You got to figure out a way to really identify who your guest avatar is and what exactly do they want. Why are they coming to your area, and what do they really want in your space?
Yeah.
And I think those are really key. Like for me, it's pretty easy. I know exactly who's coming to my property because we're an hour from Seattle and we're in the woods and we're near some hiking. There's a
Mm.
river. So I know who's coming. I know why. I know what they want to spend. Um, but I can't say that for everybody's market. But
Right.
you need to, if you're one of these folks, like if you've got a place in like Chandler, Arizona or something, you need to figure out why people are coming to that
Yeah.
area and really deliver like as much as you can, like over the top, deliver that experience to them, and and that's where the creativity comes in. And it's not all design. I think design's a part of it, but you have to be creative and you got to think outside the box. And it's also, I could go down all kinds of rants on what people do wrong with design and things like that. But I think if you could do that right, I think that's
Yeah.
that's really going to set you apart.
And so, what would you say? Because I would venture to guess from what I know about our listening audience and this
Hmm.
community is that I would put most of them in the not one step up from mediocre,
Yeah.
good to great. But some are
Yeah.
sitting at good. And so I guess
Hmm.
like good experience, they're doing a lot of things right. But
Yeah.
I still think there's that next level, and I usually talk about it as the unicorn, the horse, and the donkey. So the
Yeah.
workhorse is where a lot of them are, where it's like you have pretty good occupancy, but you're not charging the highest rates. It's not a luxury experience. People are coming to the area and choosing your spot versus coming
Hmm.
to the area for your spot, which is more of
Yeah.
that unicorn piece.
Yeah.
It feels like yours fit more in that unicorn piece because of the intentionality that you've put into them and the immersive experience you're creating. Could you give us maybe things that you feel comfortable sharing? A couple examples from your cabins that do really take them from good to great, that might be able to just plant a seed for folks of what that looks like.
Yeah. I think it you need something that's unique. I think that's a big part of it. If you want to be that unicorn status, it has to be something like you said. They have to see it on Instagram and go, "I don't care where that is. I'm going there,"
Yeah.
and or wherever they see it.
Yeah.
And so I think it starts off. It has to photograph well. It has to be a little bit different, and that's why you see a lot of like tree houses and tiny houses and things doing well, because those are so different, and the experience might not be as great as if it was like a 5 bedroom, really really nice house. But nobody wants to see that. They've been there
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
They want to go to something that's so unique and so different and interesting, And let's be honest, a lot of it really comes down to like, how's it going to show up in my Instagram photos?
Yeah.
And
So
like,
much of that.
that's actually a big thing that I talk about is those Instagrammable moments when you're designing your space. Where are they going to take their Instagram photos, or what's that photo that's going to go viral on Instagram?
Yeah.
You have to think about that stuff and plan it into your space.
Which is
And
crazy. I hated that during my build. I thought about that and I flirted with like, should we put a mural on this wall? But then I
uh-huh.
would stop myself because I was like, that's not why I'm creating this. But
Yeah.
but also we have several spots that ended up being very Instagrammable, which has served us very well, right? So like your
Yeah.
advice is well taken. I think it really does make a difference. But the authentic part of cabin culture kills me when I'm like, how will this appear on Instagram?
Well, I have very strong opinions on this part, because I think so many people, they hear that Instagrammable moment and they think like, oh, let's do like a photo backdrop. And that is it might work for some things, but that's not what I do. What I do is I look at what architectural elements in the space are going to create a beautifully composed photo, and then what's a centerpiece that they're really going to uh, gravitate towards. Like, for example,
I was
I
just
have
going to ask for examples. I'm looking yours
yes,
up right now so that I can pull up some pictures and see them.
yeah. So for one of my cabins, ours are Canyon Creek cabins 1, 2, and 3. So
Okay. I'm
real
looking at one
original.
right now. Which one are you
Okay,
talking about?
so I'll talk about cabin 1
Okay.
first. Cabin 1, there's a couple shots that are our Instagrammable moments. One is literally just outside the silhouette of the cabin,
Yeah.
just from the driveway looking, and that's a unique aspect that you know that's just the cabin. We can't we can't really
Right.
change that. That's just what
Okay,
the cabin is.
but we can narrow it down a little bit. I'm looking at it now.
Mhm.
A part of that is just the shape of the cabin because it's really
Yeah.
unique. But part
Hmm.
of it is you can see directly through one large window through all
Hmm.
the way across it. And I do think
Yeah.
there's something about that transparency where you get a glimpse into it that you don't see very often in the
Yeah.
exterior of cabins. That is something that
Yeah.
could be replicated in your own unique way, but that is very
Sure.
stunning about it.
Yep. Yep. So that's one shot, and then inside, one of the shots for that cabin is simply just in the living room from behind the sofa, which is a custom designed sofa that I made,
Oh
and
yeah.
then with the fireplace, and then those big sort of geometric shaped windows.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
that's
And you
another
designed
shot.
that couch, I'm assuming?
Yes, I designed it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not to be clear, it is the window, the whole everything about this shot is stunning, but that couch is also something that, like, I've never seen anywhere and fits perfectly into that space.
Yeah, it's designed so that guests can sleep on. It's a day bed, so you can remove the cushion and you can sleep. Two different people can sleep on those day beds, so it helps to boost our how many people can sleep in the
Yeah.
cabin.
I love that.
And
It also gives the feel I actually love that about cabins, not just fitting more people, but also to me, that's cabin culture. Too many people
hmm
squeezed in a too small
yeah,
space, right?
yeah, exactly.
And so I love that. Just even the idea of falling asleep next to your friend and like talking late at night in front of the fire because that's the
hmm
place to sleep. To me, that's cabin
Yeah,
culture, which is beautiful.
exactly, exactly. And we took that. It'll also appear again at cabin 3 when we chat about that one. So that's one, and then another shot is upstairs. We have this little balcony mezzanine thing. There's a bedroom up there, but then there's just this little spot. It's a little perch, and then you could see out the window down to the river. It's a really cool spot, but it's also an awkward spot. So we stuck a hammock in there almost as an afterthought. And that hammock has gotten so many photos.
Is this Cabin Creek 1?
Yeah, yeah,
Cabin
Canyon Creek.
number 1. Okay, wait, I'm trying to
Yes.
find that. It's not in your Airbnb listing.
That's not.
That's so funny, but it doesn't matter because clearly it's doing well, but, like, that's the Instagrammable one, that's what people are
Yeah, we
sharing.
should
Yeah,
we should add that. We
yeah,
should add that. It's a good lifestyle shot because usually you'll have somebody hanging out in the hammock, and then they'll shoot, and then you'll see the river through the window outside.
yeah,
So that's a really good one. And then there's always people always want to photograph. If you can, there's some shots where you can get the hot tub with the river behind it.
yeah.
So that one, the best one for that is cabin 3. We have a really good line of sight from the hot tub down to the river, and we've had some viral videos on TikTok and Instagram from that shot, and sometimes you'll see kayakers going through the
Amazing.
canyon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
that is part of for some of the coolest cabins I've ever seen, including these, the
mhm,
location is irreplaceable. So even before you
yeah.
get to the actual cabin, it is
Hmm.
thinking about like where is it located? Is there a signature something on the land
Yeah.
that makes it feel
Yeah.
different?
Yeah. The most powerful aspect of our cabins is the one thing that we could not have created, and that's the river and
Yeah.
the old growth trees around it.
Yeah.
I mean, we bought it for that, but we
Right.
couldn't have just like created that.
Right.
And so we really kind of lucked out on that. But that's also why we doubled down and bought more cabins on the same river.
Right. Because you knew the location is like a huge part of the value proposition here.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
can we talk about the tiny home for just a minute? Because this is
Sure.
very unique in how much glass is in like half of this. And I don't know if that's a porch or actually like part of this space, but there is a lot of glass in
Yeah.
the tiny home. Tell me, did you build this from scratch? I mean, it looks maybe like a shipping container. No, you built it.
So this is how this came about. Part of the structure is a shipping container tiny house that we bought already made.
Okay.
And so we bought it down in Oregon, brought it up on a truck, and just plopped it down. And I poured some footings and we set it in place. But it was so little. It originally had like a little Murphy bed in there. But once you put the Murphy bed down, there's no room for a table or anything.
Yeah.
So I said, we've got to come up with we've got to come up with something else beyond that because this is way too small.
Yeah.
So I had my handyman neighbor build a shed, but I said it's not gonna be a shed. It's gonna be technically a shed, but it's like a bunkhouse. It becomes the bedroom. So
Okay.
definitely didn't get permits, and now I'm facing that's a whole nother story. We're facing some issues with that, but we could circle back to that. We built the bunkhouse. Off of the bunkhouse, this was during like the lockdowns in COVID. I decided I'm going to make use of my time and I'm going to build the deck that connects everything, and I'm going to build that sunroom because I wanted there was no sort of gathering space with this sort of two structure thing.
Yeah.
So I built that, and despite it not being a real functional year-round room, it has a fireplace in it and has a little overhead heater, and it can be used for the most part year-round.
It's pretty
But
cool.
it's really cool,
Yeah.
and uh, that was probably one of the biggest. It became one of the biggest selling features for that cabin,
I bet.
and the way I pitch this to guests, whether it's literal or not, is it's like it's almost a glamping experience. It's like
Yeah.
an elevated glamping experience
Yeah.
because your living room becomes the outdoors,
Yeah.
and that to me is really kind of goes back to just connecting with nature and being
Yeah.
immersed in nature. Like I love cabins, but a cabin that's sort of indoor outdoor is even more
I
connecting to
know.
nature. So
Have you
it's
seen
not for
Casper
everybody.
Cole's, Cabin Anna? Have you seen that space? He's based
Um,
out of Amsterdam.
okay.
The shell is on wheels, and you can
Oh, I have seen
pull
this.
the I mean,
I have I
just
have
what
seen
you're
this.
describing of, like, indoor, outdoor cabin
Yeah.
experience. This is the only other cabin I've seen that really reminds me of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Melissa's cabin in Vermont, it's like a outdoor it's very much like glamping, it's screened in, and it's incredible
Mm,
like that, but there are very few. To my point, there I can only
yeah.
name 3 that I can think of that are like that, that really are a gateway to, like, I'm not camping, it is nicer,
Mhm.
but I'm connected with nature in a way that I'm not inside a fancy cabin.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that cabin, another thing we did is we tucked the hot tub down more closer to the river,
Yeah,
and then there's a little stone pathway to get down there, and that's just kind of more again immersing yourself in nature. You sit in
yeah,
that hot tub and you just stare up at these like 150-foot trees.
yeah,
But as I mentioned, we didn't get permits for this because I'm thinking, oh, it's a temporary structure, it's just kind of, well, the county ended up finding out, somebody reported us. And so now we're in the process of either bringing it up to code and getting proper permits, or wiping it off and having to build a whole entirely new
Oh
cabin.
my gosh. So which one
Yeah.
feels more doable? I don't even know what it's like to bring it up to permit.
So yeah, that's the issue. I think I love what we have there, and guests really love it.
Yeah.
But I think if we're it's gonna be a lot of expense and a lot of work to get it, even just to get that up to code. So I think at that point, it's better just to take it off and build something new.
Wow.
And the good news is it's an opportunity
Yeah.
because, I've got a lot of ideas on what I would do if I was to build a cabin from scratch.
Yeah.
And this is like a forced opportunity to build something new, and we will definitely knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
want to,
I was going to say,
yeah,
stay tuned to Andy, because I feel like this is going to be fun to follow. Do you share this kind of stuff on social media? Like, will you
I,
share the
I
process
will.
behind that?
I will. Yeah, we're actually. I'm going to start. I haven't been very good at doing this kind of like as like
Yeah.
progressive, like as we're doing it, but I definitely see the value, especially this. We have a cabin on either side. Okay. So people are going to be staying
Right.
right next to a construction site, which
Yeah.
normally is not a huge, like, that's not really a very exciting thing for people,
Yeah.
unless it's a property that they've been watching. They've been watching it from
Yes.
conception all the way
It
through, and
feels
they're
different.
thinking, yeah, like, oh my gosh, they're putting the roof on, and we're going to be right there. It's exciting. So,
Yeah. That's such
and
a
of
good
course,
point.
yeah, and of course, if there's some real serious work, we'll block out the cabins and really noisy stuff. But I think it'll give people an opportunity to feel connected to something that they've been watching um, and curious about and excited about. And again, it comes back to like watching how Devin did what he did, which is
Right.
so impressive. Building a cabin while building such a following, and so that's a huge inspiration for
Yeah.
this. And I might have to have him like give me some pointers on
Yeah.
how to do that.
He was very good at doing that. I mean, while working full time and running a video
Yeah,
production business and building it all himself and I just don't even know. I mean, to be in your 20s with that much
yeah,
energy again. But yes. But I do think, to your point of like, when people go on that journey, that's going to change. It almost feels like, oh, I have a front row seat for a weekend,
yes,
not like, oh,
exactly.
there's
Yeah.
construction going on next door.
Yeah, and I think the goal is, and this is what will happen because I won't do it otherwise, is even though we're taking off like a pretty cool, loved structure, we're going to be putting on something that's going to be 10 times as
Yeah.
cool and loved. And I think if people see what our ideas are, and even if we maybe involve some of them in making
Yeah.
some of the decisions, I think that will really help. Um, and we'll do our best, like I said, to not have it interfere with the guest stay as much as possible.
Yeah.
But it's going to be fun and exciting, and that property is so beautiful
It is
that
incredible.
it deserves an equally beautiful designed architectural piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to follow along with that. I am also excited to come out west and hopefully see them one day, because I do think it
Should.
is one of the most beautiful pieces of land I've seen to host an Airbnb on. So I'll be in touch about that at some point. Andy, thank you so much for joining me for this.
Of course, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I really
It's been
enjoyed
fun.
talking with you.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks so much for joining us, and if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can also find me on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin. Looking forward to next week.